Hi, I'm Naomi Hall, and I'd like to welcome you to our summit on stress management for educators. And my whole goal with this summit has been to provide you with powerful steps to reduce your stress and just be able to find that quality time for yourself and for your family. Because when you're stressed, you just can't see that time, you can't find it, you can't make it. So today I have with me Thomas Skovholt, who received a BA at St. Olaf College and his master's and doctorate from the University of Missouri in counseling and psychology. So he was a faculty member at the University of Florida and then the University of Minnesota for 46 years. He has taught many master's counseling students who now work in schools, agencies, private practice, and higher education. He's also taught at universities in Turkey and Singapore. His areas of research and clinical expertise include resiliency and burnout prevention, clinical supervision, mastery, and expertise in the helping professions, education and healthcare, and the counseling process. So welcome, Dr. Skovholt.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This will be fun, and you're doing good work. It's important.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're here, and your background is perfect for what we're doing. So I understand that you do a lot of work with first responders as therapists and counselors, and you work with them in burnout and resiliency. Do you see a connection between what they're experiencing with stress and burnout and what educators are experiencing right now?
Yeah, I kind of think of the topic is around relationship intense professions. So over the years, I worked particularly in counselor therapists, advisors, those people, but also lots of teachers, educators, academic advisors in universities, physicians, nurses. So I think about the real topic is people who are relationship intense in their work towards other people. So it's one-way caring relationships, not two-way, one-way. And it's also, here's a term that I learned a long time ago from a professor in Chicago in the 60s. It's the other person's hot center. So it's focusing on their needs, especially probably in the therapy profession or healthcare. Sometimes kids don't want to learn certain things, but it is also their hot center. So it's this intense focus on the needs of other people in one-way caring relationships as EMTs, as elementary teachers, as physicians, whatever. So that's the way I think about it. And I've tried to present this to different professions. Now, people kind of think we're not like them, we're different, but I try to think about the similarities between these fields in terms of what it takes from them, what they have to give in terms of it's the other person's needs, that child in third grade and or whatever. We go through the whole list of different professions. So there you go.
Yeah, that I love your description of like it's those relationship intense professions, and it does take a lot from you. You are giving, so that's
giving. It's a giving. When I was in Singapore, I did a little study of education students that were training to be teachers. And Singapore is one of those places where the test scores are really high. It's worked really hard. But Singapore's professor and I asked the students to rate their best teachers and their worst teachers. And the best teachers, I guess most liked teachers too, were described in all psychological terms: caring, engaged, involved, enjoyable. And the worst teachers, they had a word that we don't use very much called fierce, which is kind of boiled hostility. So, of course, the content is important and the intellectual part is important. But when these students thought about their best teacher, and they were going to be teachers, best teacher in their early years, it was the most powerful word used most often in this qualitative study was caring. But caring, there's one book called The Cost of Caring, which is in this broad field. So there's a cost to caring, and there's a joy to caring. This man that wrote Teacher Man about teaching in New York City, he said when he had a real good experience with his students, taught in a kind of distressed school, he said, when I felt really good about what they learned, I was hopping and skipping down the streets in Manhattan. So there is a joy to teaching, but
Yeah.
there's also a cost to caring.
Mhm. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an interesting study. I never would have thought that it would come out like that, but that's
Yeah.
so interesting
Right. Yeah.
that
We did a little article for an obscure journal, but as many of them are.
but it's so interesting because when I think of like my favorite teachers, my best teachers, you're right. They cared, they were involved,
Right.
yeah.
They connected to Naomi, right?
Mhm.
They knew you in a way. They care, whatever, cared about you, were connected to you. And just think that the task, I guess, is for teachers to connect with all those students, right? It's
Mhm.
of different kinds. And so it's great when we're kind of, for me too, a favored student, but it's not much fun when you're an unfavored student. But the teacher's job is to connect. And of course, in the burnout literature and the research or in the inventories, one of the things is when people can, teachers, physicians, whatever, can no longer care about the people they're working with. They don't care. They're more, then they can get cynical or
Mhm.
angry at the people trying to help. I have a friend who's a dentist, retired dentist. I'm kind of in an next phase, a retired dentist. And he said one of his friends decided it was time to quit dentistry as his profession when a patient said, my tooth is really cold. And the guy said to himself, I don't care.
Mm.
I really don't. I don't care if your tooth is cold. And he said to himself, wow, I got to get out. I mean, one thing is getting out. Another one is a lot of what your questions are about. How do people deal with feeling like they can't care anymore?
Yeah. So when someone gets to that point, because I've seen myself get there, I've seen other educators get there. Um, is it possible for that person to make a recovery and stay in the profession? Because I think a lot of educators are at that point,
Right,
but they don't want to leave. Like this is their calling. So
right.
can they make a comeback?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really a great question and a great topic and a great thing that you're working on. So I think the first thing is just a shout out or description of talk about the fact that it's the fact that these people care about other people. They care about their work. They want the children to succeed.
Mhm.
So if you didn't care about it, you weren't engaged, it wouldn't be such a cost of caring. So
Mhm.
first, a kind of a salute or a statement about that. I think the next thing is I mean, there's a lot of parts to it when there are multiple people involved and everybody's a little different, but I have a term called boundaried generosity that came out of research with some expert practitioners. And it's a little bit of a fancy term, but boundaries, one word, we all know boundaries, but boundaried generosity. So it's a dynamic word. How much of yourself can you give, and how much do you have to protect?
Mhm.
Because if we don't protect ourselves, there's nothing left to give.
Mhm.
And so it's also comes and goes as a term. I mean, it's dynamic. So somebody can have three little kids at home, and then I worked with some elementary teachers, and they love children, and they had children all day, and at night they had children. They love children. Well, it was like, the second shift, they're just overwhelmed with it. So how do you do the boundary generosity? I mean, it's a nice term, but it's really hard. I mean, I've heard one person say, the time for me was in the driveway when I got my car home,
Yep.
between working and being inside the house. And she also knew that this was kind of not sustainable, but it was what she had. And
Mhm.
so it's just a statement about how hard these lives could be, especially working class women. No, excuse me, that's not right. Double shift women or women that are kind of working in professions and have children at home and have a second shift kind of stuff. we talk about male, female responsibilities and all that, but back to your comment about can people come back? I think it's first an acknowledgement. Well, I want to back up a little bit. There's a description I had with a friend of mine studying professional development of early exit. So one of the things that happens in a lot of the helping fields, and I saw it with nurses and counselors, is people get overwhelmed early in their work, and overwhelmed. Imposter syndrome is a very popular term for new people in a profession. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like an adolescent with adult clothes on. This is ridiculous. They're going to find out. And I don't know what to do with all this data. And then counseling people think at night. I've been thinking about this client who said she's been hurt by her boyfriend and I can't sleep. And, how do you manage all the content that comes in? So there is an early exit thing, but I think you're talking about more somewhat experienced people who just get, maybe we could say, worn down, overwhelmed, kind of worn down. And I think the first is to acknowledge it, and to oneself, to people in their personal life, and then professionally. And again, I can say all these things, but I've been around as long as anybody else. I've had more failures in counseling than any young counselor because I have worked a long time. So I can say these simple things, but we just use words to describe things. So acknowledge it, talk to people, have a mentor or peers. I think one of the things in teaching that maybe is important is in my experience, or listening to teachers, they get into cynical, negative comments with their other teachers about what the principal, the structure, the instruction, the kid, everything. And one of the most important things is to keep really positive vitality, the positive emotions in one's life, personally and professionally. So when people get into the negative, cynical emotions, it's dangerous. So one part is that. Another is to kind of define success. I know this doesn't always fit, but I have a definition of success that comes from the idea of it's your part of the process. The teacher's job is to do their part. The student's job is to do their part. Now, it's easy to say that, but I know teaching beginning master's level counseling students who are, highly competent, they've worked hard, they've got really high grades, then they get with a client and they feel unsuccessful because the client's behavior hasn't changed. But their whole life, they've only been in charge of themselves. And so we can do our part, but we can't do the other part. Now, so it's a process definition of success. And I have a term called the cycle of caring, which involves getting connected, being involved, saying goodbye, and having renewal. And you could apply it to a school year, like fall is getting connected with 25 fourth graders say, Miss Smith, my name is Rita. What do you think of my shoes? And every one of them wants to have being known, right? And so that starts, but you have to have all this energy for these children. The person does, right? And then the school year, active involvement. And then what's nice about teaching is that there are goodbye farewells structurally. There are, parties, festivals, plays, graduation, closing the door. And in theory, at least, people have the summer. And I call it having the summer for renewal. Actually, first of all, I think the goodbyes, the endings are really important in all these relationships. People don't talk enough about endings or things. We always talk about beginnings. Start well, think well, talk, but it's all a loss process. There's a lot of grieving at the end. That great age, that fourth grade, and with that group of students that now trust this teacher, will never to be together again with this teacher in this way. And so it's a lot of grieving and joy and relief, but there's also this. I know people have jobs in the summer, they got a lot of things, but it's psychologically, it's all preparation for Miss Smith. I'm Joanna. What about my shoes?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can't do it the next year, and the next year, and the next year, and the next year, that's when maybe people they can't do it anymore. It's kind of what you're saying. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And so, so there's, I think, one of the things is to really focus on having lots of connections. In one of the research studies we did, who are highly resilient psychotherapists. I mean, this is my real. It's a hard job, but who are these people that highly resilient, anti-burnout? They have lots of connections, and here's the group of connections to positive other people, positive connections with other people, positive connections to themselves, which is our own self-development and well-being and sense of being lovable and cared for. A lot of these are early attachment experiences, but that's important because it's important when you're in these stressful interpersonal situations, so you don't project and deal with it. You can deal with the negativity from students without personalizing it. That's hard.
Very hard.
But it's important. Yeah. But learning, even a study of highly experienced counselors and therapists, they get negative with their clients who are negative. Well, come on, that's the idea, is to they're suffering. Come on, don't get into their negativity toward you. But it's hard. Then another one is connections with learning. Continue to learn and learn and learn. And I think part of it, the learning process, is it gives energy to the teacher. It isn't necessarily that you're going to learn something that's really great or new, but I'm going to keep learning. And I keep looking, where's the energy? Where's the vitality? Where's it come from? And another one is learning. And the fourth one is being in, and you started with something like this. This is honorable work. This is valuable work. I am in a field it's really important. It's important that we have good teachers. And I am one of those. And so I think those connections to feeling, and when people, I remember working with some childcare workers, actually in Ireland, working with childcare workers, and they had systematically missed a lot of children, had been abused, both by priests and also by the laundry system, where teenage girls went to these places. And I don't know if you know about that, but they had felt that as a profession, they had failed the children. And wow, you talk about discouraging. So one of the senior faculty members in social work talked at this convention I gave a resilient practitioner talk at, and just said, we have to get over this. We did our best. We tried. So the importance of feeling good about your work, because if you feel like, God, what I did was useless, boy, there's a burnout factor right there. Yeah. So that's a lot of talking with with a question.
Oh, that's great. You kind of hit my next question of like, where does a burnout teacher start? Like, how do they start healing? And you gave us a lot of points of important things.
Yeah, I think some of the same things, or maybe a little different. I've written and talked and done things on this topic for a long time, so it's hard to take the Dagwood sandwich and put it into a little bit. But I guess back to the acknowledging it, what and that's what you're doing. You're kind of talking about, this is a really important topic in our field.
Mhm.
And in the summer, maybe people are getting these things about how to look at it.
Mhm.
Realizing that maybe, maybe I'm giving too much.
Mhm.
But see, that these are really hard topics, because maybe I'm giving too much. What do you mean I'm giving too much? My job is to give.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm spending too much learning new curriculum or topics, more about geography or geology or geometry. I mean, just take a three G's. You can take it all night. I mean, how much should we know about this, and how much should we give, and how much should we think about it, and how much should we help young teachers, and how much should we respond to parents right away? I mean, there's so much. And I give you a personal example. I taught, and as you mentioned, I taught in Turkey for a year and I was a Fulbright professor. Well, I thought, damn, I got to work hard. I got a lot to do. Well, this is a country of 70 million people, so there's a lot a person could do in counseling or psychological field. This was in the 80s, and I just kind of frantic about how much to do or how much not to do. Because if you're conscientious, which you hope teachers are, in some ways, that makes it harder, but it's good. It's a good conscientious. So I talked to a woman who is the Fulbright representative for Americans working in Egypt. And I told her this problem, I don't know what to do. And she said, Tom, they'll take everything you have and everything the person behind you has and everything behind the person behind you, that person has. And then she went on a few more. And she then said, how much are you going to do? So it was like startling, like, actually, I thought if I did enough, it'd be done, but it isn't done.
Mhm.
And so the question is how much to give to the children so that you have given enough, and how much have you given so much you have to quit.
Mm. Mhm.
And or you're performing at such a low level that you're not a good teacher, and you can't give one thing, you can't give the enthusiasm. I mean, students need to have enthusiastic teachers, right? Who are is the meta message, what I'm talking about is important, so it's important for you to learn. But if you don't care, you're cynical, depressed, unengaged, disengaged, all those get communicated to kids. So I think it's really just really hard. How much is enough? And there's another example I learned from let's see, a cancer doctor, with oncology, sorry. And I went to visit him with a friend of mine, and he was working with stage 4 lung cancer, which means that in a profession where his job is to keep people alive, most of his patients would die.
Mm.
For one thing, how do we then define success? So I was working on the cycle of caring model, and I think I also listened to him. He got really engaged with his patients. He helped them with medications and treatments. He stayed with them through the treatment, and he said goodbye. And he had some way, this renewal issue is kind of different. How do you do it? Sometimes between appointments and counseling, you have a drink of water and you're ready to go again. But he some way got the renewal, because guess what? There was a next patient who also had stage 4 lung cancer. So how do you define success? He defined success as his part of the process. And so even though we want students to all be at us, and I think maybe teaching is the hardest because you have so much pressure. Teachers have, my understanding, so much pressure on standardized test scores, and then they're defined somewhat on how well their students do. And it's confusing because there's some research that suggests, that's good teaching, but what is good teaching? I live in St. Paul, and St. Paul's is a wonderful place, but we also have city schools where we have more refugees, we have more Somalis, we'll have more Hmong from Southeast Asia, and these, great, they're here, they're in the United States, but the test scores aren't as high. So, my sister taught in a school like that for 30 years. So, it's you get into a wealthy suburban school, test scores are high and the teachers feel good. You're in a inner city school and the test scores are low and the teachers feel more depressed. Well, come on. I also taught doctoral student seminar one year. At the same semester, I taught beginning community college students, and I also taught in a prison with male felons. Well, I'm the same person, but the doctoral students all read the material. They all love teachers. They all love themselves as learners. They all think they're talented. They've always gotten praise. These people have always been told you're a failure, you're stupid, you can't do well. And so how do you define success, I guess, is a way of saying it. And so I think one of the important things for burnout teachers is to really work on what is success and how much do I have to keep for myself. There's a description by a physician who said his job is to have detached concern. I don't particularly like that term, but it also does say, the physician constantly, in these 15 or 20-minute appointments as an internist, you constantly have people that are distressed because their heart has problems, their kidney has problems. They're worried about something. So how much do you get involved in it? How much don't you? So I think it's just the burnout teacher is, first of all, saying, maybe it's like somebody in combat. You give them a lot of credit for being in that, this is an analogy, in that war, and then saying, you got to have R&R to be able to go back. Of course, who gives them R&R, but some way, some renewal and boundaries, and boundaried generosity.
Those are good. If we look at kind of the other end of the spectrum, kind of new teachers who are going into the profession, what can they do to prevent the burnout? To know this is a hard profession, it is a caring profession, it is giving.
Yes.
How do you stay fresh at it?
No, that's good. I think one of the things is that sometimes I guess graduate or undergraduate, the education training programs in colleges, universities are bringing in more a self-care practice. So if you have, this is from my counseling experience with master's level counselors, when they would talk in group supervision, when they would talk about the struggles they're having in their new clinical work, or you get new practice teaching, is that the right term? Teaching. They also have a segment, what are you doing for self-care? As students, what are you doing for self-care? So it's baked into the system as their students. Like, this is a hard profession. We have to prepare you. Part of it is to take, they're a little trite, but they're also accurate. Take care of yourself. And that means a variety of ways to not do 100%, 100% work or effort 100% of the time. Okay? And I think the beginning teachers, one of the things that I like is when people kind of start as EAs or educational assistants, and they have a teacher and they're in a classroom with somebody. So they're the modeling of what to do in all these complex interpersonal situations with students. All of a sudden it's Friday and they don't want to do anything. What do I do? And so a veteran teacher feels it, knows it, reacts to it. A beginner, oh my God, it's chapter 13 when the students aren't motivated. What did they say? So I think it's, if you can have good senior people, but then sometimes the senior people don't want to do that role, but so they help, or don't throw somebody into too much too early, because the most important thing is to feel successful early, because we're all fragile. I mean, when I first did articles for journals, it was an obscure journal, but they accepted it. Hey, wow. As opposed to getting rejected. Or teaching in a situation where you can be successful, or somebody helps you define success. I think, I know a nurse who worked in a situation with transplants a long time ago. Nursing Minnesota was an originator of a lot of the transplants. Not so much, that's it's a field that's developed now. And this nurse was working with these transplant patients, most of who died. So she got out of that field. She's not going to work with transplant patients anymore. It was just a young, new, unsupervised night shift nurse, overwhelmed, early exit. Not from the field, but from that work. So I think one of the things is really protecting young teachers. And sometimes they get the worst, I don't know, worst is the word we use, right? They get the most difficult situations because their seniority, but early exit is a term, and learning how to process. For example, let's say you have Thursday in a class, and you have 5 hours of interaction with children. Oh my, there's so much going on. What do you do with all that? Now, in my field, you have clinical supervision where you talk to a senior person, but educators don't, and dentists and physicians, most fields don't have, and it's not critical supervision, it's helpful developmental supervision. So who do you talk to about everything that happened to you that day? Maybe somebody at home, but you have to be careful about saying too much. Maybe it's another teacher, but they're running off to take care of their children. But I think and then in time, people learn how to process and not process. How much to think about things and how much not to think about things. How much to let things come to in the shower. The great example that you're in the shower and the creative ideas come, and let that happen. And other times just get away from it. So I think how fragile, of course, new young people don't want to be considered fragile, but how fragile they are professionally. Another example was a person, I think this was a third grade teacher in a workshop I did. She said her first year, she went to the other third grade teacher and said, "What are we doing today?" And then she went and did whatever the other person did. And then after 10 years, I said, "Did you go to the other teacher and said, 'What are we doing today?'" She said, "No, of course not. I know what to do." So it's the power of reflected experience, not just experience, because there's this term, you can have 20 years of experience, or you can have 1 year of experience 20 times. I mean, there's the research on experience and levels of education and people being more competent is not really strong. Even though we bake it in, you get more degrees and you get more experience, you get a higher thing. But part of it is maybe how much people learn from their experience. And one of the things I learned with talking to a teacher once, 7th grade teacher, she said she was so busy and so frantic in her classroom, she didn't have time to think about what was happening and to learn from it. And so it's like, I thought it was like a high-speed movie going on, and you get home and get away from it, and you don't have time. Of course, the generalization, maybe it's not accurate for many of the people in your audience, but I felt like she didn't have time to learn from it. To think about it, to talk to people. I mean, what do we use? The term reflection is an older term, or processing, or so. It seems from my profession, there's a lot of clinical supervision for people, that seems like it's unfair to teachers did not have time for somebody to sit with them and talk about what's happening to them. Not the lunchroom thing, not maybe that's fine. Friday night, people go out, have drinks together. That's valuable. But maybe built into the field. But
Yeah, that's great. Like we, as a profession, are not great to our new teachers. As you said, they often get kind of the worst assignments. And you're right, they need that mentorship programs that I've experienced have not done what you've described of like being there to help them process. That wasn't the mentorship that I saw in schools or that I experienced. I know there are some schools that do mentorship well.
yeah,
But that's definitely something we need to, if we want to change the teacher shortage and we want to keep our young teachers, you're right, we've got to take care of them.
right. I heard once that half the special ed teachers quit before the number of years they have to be fully licensed. So, I mean, that's that kind of early exit, to use that term, boy, really to work on that. And yeah, new teachers get thrown into a hard thing. Now, it'd be in the ideal system, you could do that, but you have to help them process what success is.
Yeah.
Right. Because then if they define like none of these students are listening to me and they throw things in the classroom and their fights, I mean, all the things they don't know how to read, just like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Might as well go to Starbucks.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. I do have 3 quick fun questions for you to wrap up.
Good. Well, yeah, and these are, I mean, just before you do that, I don't want to overdo it, but it's a real privilege for me to be in this field. And as my doctoral advisor a long time ago said, "Hey, Tom, I think you're kind of working on helping the helpers," which I thought, well, that's good. I'm trying to help myself, but help the helpers. Okay, what do you got for fun questions?
So I'd love to know, what are you reading? What are you watching? And what are you listening to?
Oh, yeah, good. Oh, maybe not so good. Let's see. I'm just starting the new biography of Martin Luther King.
Oh, okay.
Just got published. I tend to do nonfiction, even though my girlfriend says fiction is really nonfiction. I mean, but I think, oh, fiction is fiction. So and it's maybe a gender divide a little bit too. Women read fiction and men read nonfiction.
I don't know.
Anyway.
I read a pretty good mix.
Okay, good for you. Yeah, that's just these generalizations really fall apart quickly, like around gender. But so, what is that? Tina Turner.
Okay.
I mean, if that's, I saw her perform live some years ago, and oh my God! So I've been listening to her and her songs, partially because there's so much intense energy and positivity. And for me, also Celine Dion, even though she's got a serious illness now, just beautiful, beautiful song. So, watching, I'm going to the Minnesota Twins game tonight.
Oh.
So, yeah. So those are some things. Biking a lot.
Nice.
I just took. We just went with. I showed you one of my photos I sent you. 4 grandchildren, all in their 20s. We took them to Montreal and Quebec City.
Oh, that's great.
That's really, that they're in. They have luckily at a 1 week window, and Grandpa me pays for the whole thing, so it makes it a lot easier. Money's important, for certain things. So, there's some answers for you.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate what you've shared with us, and I appreciate the work that you've done in this field, helping helpers, and encourage the audience to check out. You have a couple of books, right?
Yeah, especially the Resilient Practitioners. Now, in its 4th edition coming out, it's been really helpful to a lot of people. And, the term resiliency, I was in Kauai. I want to Kauai. Make it quick here. On vacation with my brother, but actually I was running around the island trying to find the first resilience researchers, because the first study on resilient children were the people born in the island of Kauai in 1955, and
wow.
pediatricians, psychologists, intensive studies over 20 years. And they were basically the children of the Filipino sugarcane workers. So they weren't wealthy, but so I ran around trying to find Ruth Smith to talk to her about interviewing these people. And she had just died when I talked to her son. So how did we get to all that? Okay, so The Resilient Practitioner is a book that people have found useful. Nice
Yeah.
to talk to you. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. Bye.